A motorcycle hits a stone-lined corner at 170 miles per hour and erupts into a fireball on live television, the rider conscious inside the wreckage. A few miles down the same mountain, another rider is thrown from his bike at over 150 miles per hour and cartwheels down the hillside, caught live by a TV helicopter. A 9-time race winner, the fastest man who'd ever lapped this course, hits a patch of oil at 180 miles per hour and is killed instantly. A modern champion, 14 times a winner here, comes off at 140 miles per hour. His season ended in a heartbeat. And just last year, a TT debutant with a decade of experience on this exact road crashed at a corner called Doran's Bend and never made it home. These aren't scenes from a disaster movie. They're 5 real crashes from 5 decades on the same 37-mile stretch of road. Welcome to the Isle of Man TT, widely regarded as the most dangerous race on Earth. Since 1907, more than 260 people have died taking part in it, marshalling it, or simply standing too close. Some years have claimed 6 lives. The worst year on record claimed 11. Every one of those numbers comes from the same formula: incredible speed, ordinary public roads, and almost nothing standing between a rider and disaster. Over the next several minutes, we'll see why this race has earned its reputation as the deadliest event in motorsport, through the crashes that defined it. Every year, thousands of fans travel to a small island in the Irish Sea to watch riders hit speeds over 200 miles per hour on roads never built for racing. No runoff areas, no gravel traps, just tarmac, stone, and whatever happens to be standing beside it. More than 260 competitors, marshals, and bystanders have died here since 1907. The deadliest year was 2005, when 11 people lost their lives across the TT and the Manx Grand Prix. 6 riders died in 1970, 6 more in 2022. Some years pass clean, but those are the exception, not the rule. For most of its history, this event has claimed at least one life almost every single season it's run. The mountain that swallows riders whole. To understand why, you have to understand the course itself. The Snaefell mountain course is 37.73 miles long, with over 200 corners, and it isn't a racetrack at all. It's a network of ordinary public roads that the Isle of Man closes off once a year so that the fastest motorcycle racers in the world can use them. Riders climb mountains, drop through valleys and, critically, pass directly through narrow villages where the road barely widens enough for 2 cars to pass. Stone cottages and shop fronts sit just feet from the racing line. There's no room for error, because there's no room, period. A rider who gets it wrong in open countryside might have a chance. A rider who gets it wrong threading through a village street often doesn't. This is what makes the TT different from almost every other form of motorsport on Earth. At a circuit like Silverstone or Daytona, a rider who loses the front wheel slides into gravel or gets swallowed by a wall of air fencing. At the TT, a rider who loses the front wheel might slide into a postbox, a war memorial, or the front step of someone's house. The course doesn't forgive mistakes, it barely tolerates them. Villages like Ballor, Kirkmichael, and Glen Helen are essentially small residential streets that happen to host the fastest road racing on the planet for 2 weeks a year. Riders blast through these communities at speeds that would be unthinkable on any other public road, weaving between buildings that have stood for centuries, with spectators often standing just behind a simple rope or a low garden wall. It's an extraordinary thing to witness in person. Locals describe the noise of a superbike pack tearing through their village at full throttle as something that rattles windows and shakes the ground. For the riders, threading a 200 horsepower machine through a gap barely wider than the bike itself, at speeds well over 100 miles per hour, leaves no margin whatsoever for a mechanical fault, a patch of damp tarmac, or a single lapse in concentration. This, more than any single hazard, is what defines the danger of the TT. Not one specific obstacle, but an entire 37-mile environment of narrow village streets and mountain roads where the racing surface and ordinary daily life sit only feet apart. The mountain section itself, the highest point of the course at Brandywell, some 1,384 feet above sea level, presents its own completely separate category of risk. Up on the open moorland, there are no walls, no buildings, and theoretically more room. But what the mountain takes away in obstacles, it replaces with weather. Fog can descend in minutes. Rain on the high sections can reduce visibility to near zero. Surface temperature drops sharply as riders climb, and a tire that was perfectly warm through the lower village sections can go suddenly cold and unpredictable as it crosses the open ridgeline. Riders who have raced here for decades describe the mountain section not as somewhere you relax, but as somewhere you hold your breath. The roads up there are exposed, bumpy, and littered with the kind of subtle surface irregularities, crests, compressions, camber changes, that at 150 plus miles per hour become the difference between staying on and being launched into the heather. How it all began, 1907, and the birth of a death trap. The Isle of Man TT was born out of frustration. In the early years of the 20th century, Britain had imposed strict speed limits on public roads, limits so low that motor manufacturers couldn't conduct meaningful performance tests or racing events on the mainland. The solution was both elegant and entirely reckless: travel to a small island in the Irish Sea, whose government was, and remains, independent of Westminster, and convinced them to close their roads for racing. The first tourist trophy race was held in 1907, contested by the pioneering machines of an industry that was still barely a decade old. Those early riders wore tweed jackets and goggles. Their bikes had no brakes worth speaking of, no suspension to absorb the island's broken roads, and engines that could barely sustain speeds modern riding lawnmowers would shame. And yet, even then, people died. The first fatality came in 1911, when Victor Surridge crashed during practice. He wasn't the last. As the decades passed and the machines evolved, from the primitive single-cylinder engines of the Edwardian era to the screaming two-strokes of the 1960s to the modern 200-horsepower superbikes of the present, the fundamental format of the race never changed. Riders still went out alone, in small intervals, on the same roads, past the same stone walls. The course itself barely changed. What changed was only the speed at which everything happened, and therefore the severity of the consequences when it went wrong. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, the TT stood at the center of a growing crisis in Grand Prix motorcycle racing. Riders were dying with alarming regularity not just here, but at circuits across Europe: Spa, the Nürburgring, Monza. Eventually, the world's best riders had had enough. Giacomo Agostini, the greatest Grand Prix rider of his era and multiple TT winner, stopped coming after 1972, citing the course's dangers. Phil Reed followed. When the FIM, the sport's governing body, removed the TT from the World Championship calendar in 1977, it was widely seen as the beginning of the end for the event. It wasn't. Instead, stripped of its World Championship status, the TT simply became something else entirely: a standalone festival of pure, unregulated speed, free from the safety obligations that the World Championship was beginning to impose on circuits elsewhere. In a strange way, losing its World Championship status may be the reason the TT still exists at all in its current form, and the reason it remains as dangerous as it does. Balascari, Balagari, and the corners that define the race. One of the most infamous corners on the entire course is Balagari, nicknamed simply Balascari by the riders who fear it most. It's taken in 6th gear at speeds approaching 190 miles per hour before riders drop down to 5th and carry roughly 170 miles per hour through a blind crest into the turn. In 2010, this corner produced one of the most replayed crashes in TT history. Guy Martin, running second in the senior TT and just out of the pits after refueling, lost the front of his Honda CBR 1000RR as he came over the crest at Balagare. He described the moment afterward from his hospital bed. He felt the front start to tuck, knew almost instantly he wasn't getting it back, and made the decision to bail rather than ride it out. What followed was caught on camera and broadcast around the world. Martin's bike disintegrating against the trackside wall, its ruptured fuel tank igniting in a fireball that brought out the first red flag in a senior TT race in more than a century. Remarkably, Martin survived with a punctured lung and fractures to his back, conscious the entire time. He didn't even realize his eyebrows had been singed until he saw the photographs afterward. What makes that crash even harder to watch in hindsight is what happened at the very same corner just one day earlier. New Zealand rider Paul Dobbs, one of Triumph's key development riders, was killed at Balagari during a supersport race. 2 crashes, 1 corner, 24 hours apart. 1 fatal, 1 survived by inches. Balagare isn't an isolated case. Just a few miles away, the veranda section claimed one of the most harrowing non-fatal crashes the TT has ever produced. In 2010, the same brutal year as Martin's fireball, Local rider Conor Cummins was running third in the restarted senior TT, having just overtaken his way into podium contention when he lost control on the high-speed right-handers at the veranda. The TV helicopter happened to be tracking him at that exact moment, and the footage shows Cummins and his motorcycle cartwheeling down the mountainside, bike and rider tumbling separately across open ground, in full view of millions of viewers. Cummins suffered a badly broken arm, fractures in his back, a dislocated knee, ligament damage, and a hairline pelvis fracture. He was airlifted to Noble's Hospital. He was only 24. Remarkably, his age and fitness helped him recover well enough to return to racing within a year, a level of resilience that's almost as hard to believe as the crash itself. The death of a legend, David Jefferies at Crosby. Not every infamous TT crash was caught on camera, but some stories are too significant to the TT's history to leave out. In 2003, David Jefferies was the fastest man ever to lap the mountain course, the first rider in TT history to break the 125-mile-per-hour barrier, and a 9-time TT winner, heading into what looked like another dominant week. During a practice session, approaching the village of Crosby at roughly 180 miles per hour, Jefferies hit a patch of oil deposited on the road by another rider's machine earlier in the session. He lost control instantly, left the road and struck a telegraph pole. He was killed on impact. Fellow rider Jim Moody, following close behind, crashed into the wreckage and was struck by fallen telegraph cables, though he escaped serious injury. John McGuinness, a close friend of Jefferies who arrived at the scene moments later, described it simply as looking like a war zone. Jefferies' death remains one of the most sobering reminders in TT history that even the very best rider in the world, at the peak of his career, can be undone by something as small as a patch of oil on a public road. In the years that followed, the ACU and the Isle of Man government introduced stricter protocols around oil contamination on the course, mandatory neutralizations during practice sessions if a bike is seen trailing fluid, and faster marshal response times. Those changes almost certainly saved lives, but they came as safety improvements in motorsport so often do, as a direct response to death rather than in anticipation of it. That reactive quality, the sense that the TT learns from its worst moments rather than preventing them, is something critics have returned to again and again. And it speaks to a deeper truth about the event, that the course's fundamental character cannot be changed without destroying what the TT fundamentally is. Joey Dunlop, the quiet king of the mountain. No account of the Isle of Man TT is complete without spending time on the man who, for a generation of fans, was simply the greatest road racer who ever lived. Joey Dunlop from Ballymoney, County Antrim, won 26 TT races over a career that stretched from the mid-1970s to his final victory in the year 2000. He won 5 Formula One TTs in a row. He won across multiple classes in the same week, on multiple occasions, often on bikes he had prepared himself in a cramped garage that bore little resemblance to the professional setups of the factory-backed teams around him. He did it all in a distinctive yellow helmet, with a riding style so smooth and unhurried that spectators at the roadside sometimes wondered if he was actually trying. He was simply that good. What made Dunlop different wasn't just his talent, it was his relationship with the course itself. He reportedly memorized every bump, every shadow, every subtle change in road surface on every one of the 37.73 miles, to a degree that others found almost supernatural. Teammates and rivals described following his line through corners and being astonished not just at the speed but at the precision, the way he would find a completely different path through a sequence that everyone else was taking identically, and somehow be faster through it. His knowledge of the mountain course was, by all accounts, encyclopedic, and he kept returning, year after year, long past the point where his age might have suggested a quiet retirement, because the TT was simply what he did. It was where he was most himself. In July 2000, Dunlop was killed in a race in Tallinn, Estonia, not at the TT, but at a small road race that he'd gone to almost on a whim, competing in the lower classes for what was essentially the love of it. He was 48 years old. The outpouring of grief across Ireland and the Isle of Man was immense. His funeral in Ballymoney drew tens of thousands of people from across the motorsport world. At the next year's TT, riders wore yellow in his honor. A statue now stands at the TT grandstand. The Joey Dunlop Foundation, set up after his death, continues charitable work in the countries where Joey quietly donated trucks of food and supplies throughout the 1980s conflicts, with almost no public announcement. He was that kind of man. The TT has had faster riders since, it has never had one quite like him. The modern era, McGuinness, Hickman, and the pursuit of 136 miles per hour. After Joey Dunlop, it was John McGuinness who came to define the modern TT. McGuinness from Morecambe, a plasterer's son who drove a transit van to race meetings before the sponsorship came, accumulated 23 TT wins over a career spanning nearly 2 decades. He was the first man to lap the mountain course at over 130 miles per hour, and then over 131, and then over 132. He was the benchmark for a generation, the man you had to beat if you wanted to matter at the TT, the man whose lap records defined the upper limit of what was thought possible on a public road. McGuinness was serious about the TT in a way that went beyond professionalism. He spoke about the course with a reverence that most outsiders found puzzling. Why would a man who had seen what this road could do continue to love it so completely? His answer, repeated across dozens of interviews, was always some variation of the same thing, that nowhere else in the world gave him the feeling of being fully alive that the TT did. The mountain, the villages, the noise, the smell of the sea coming in across the Ramsey hairpin, it was all part of something irreplaceable. In 2017, McGuinness suffered a serious leg injury in a crash at the Northwest 200 in Northern Ireland that interrupted his TT career significantly and kept him away from the podium for several years. He returned. He always returned. The danger hasn't faded with modern bikes or modern safety measures. It's simply taken new forms. In 2025, 14-time TT winner Peter Hickman, one of the most successful and respected riders competing today, crashed during a qualifying session at Kerrowmore, a bumpy, fast left-hander taken at well over 100 miles per hour on a 1000cc superbike. Television footage caught visible smoke trailing from his machine and his fairing appearing loose in the moments before he lost control. Hickman came off at roughly 140 miles per hour, was airlifted to Noble's Hospital, and was later confirmed to have suffered chest, back, shoulder, and facial injuries. He survived, and by his own account afterward, joked grimly that there was nothing quite like a 140 miles per hour slap against the Manx countryside. But his entire 2025 campaign ended in that instant, a reminder that even riders at the very top of the sport, on modern machinery, with modern medical response times, are still one mechanical fault away from disaster. Hickman's crash also throws into sharp relief just how much the performance envelope has expanded in recent years. In 2018, he set a new outright lap record of 135.452 miles per hour, a figure that would have been considered science fiction even a decade earlier. On a modern superbike, Hickman is completing the 37.73-mile lap in under 17 minutes, which means he is, on average, covering a mile every 27 seconds. That figure alone doesn't quite capture it. A better way to think about it is this. He is approaching the fastest corners on the course, Ballagaray, Quarry Bends, the Nook, at speeds where a standard family car on a motorway would seem, by comparison, to be almost stationary. And he is doing it on public roads, in a helmet, with nothing between him and the tarmac but a leather suit. 3 wheels, double the risk, the sidecar dimension. The sidecar class is, in many respects, the strangest and most viscerally alarming thing you can watch at the Isle of Man TT. 2 people, a driver and a passenger, travel around the mountain course on a 3-wheeled machine that corners so low to the ground that the passenger sometimes has their body almost entirely pressed flat to the road surface in order to shift weight through a turn. These are not sentimental machines from a nostalgic age. Modern TT sidecars are purpose-built racing platforms capable of over 120 miles per hour, generating extraordinary lateral forces that the passenger manages through a combination of balance, timing, and a physical courage that is frankly difficult to articulate from the outside. They do this on the same roads, past the same stone walls, at the same speeds, but with the added complication that if something goes wrong, 2 people are going down, not 1. Down. It's worth remembering that 2025 wasn't an isolated bad week. It was simply the latest chapter in a pattern that stretches back decades. In 2016, 5 riders lost their lives across the TT's practice and race sessions, one of the deadliest seasons of the modern era, and a stark reminder that even with improved medical response and updated safety protocols, the fundamental risk of the mountain course had not changed. Whatever decade you look at, the story repeats itself. Faster bikes, better helmets, quicker air ambulances, and still, year after year, a course that punishes the smallest mistake without mercy. The 2026 TT itself is proof that this danger hasn't gone anywhere. During qualifying that year, 33-year-old Daniel Ingham, making his TT debut after a decade of experience on the mountain course through the Manx Grand Prix, crashed at Doran's Bend, a fast left-hander on the approach to Glen Helen. He died from his injuries, becoming the first fatality at the TT in 2 years, and a brutal reminder that even riders with years of experience on this exact stretch of road are never truly safe on it. The same week brought a string of other serious accidents. Sidecar duo Maria Costello and Sean Parker crashed during a qualifying session, and brothers Ryan and Callum Crowe, 4-time TT winning sidecar racers, flipped violently at Crosby Leap, with Callum requiring shoulder surgery and Ryan suffering a broken wrist and burns from sliding across the road. The back-to-back nature of these accidents was serious enough that organisers made the almost unprecedented decision to suspend the entire sidecar class for the rest of the event, a measure rarely taken in TT history, and a clear signal of just how dangerous that 1 week of racing had become. The Zero Race, what electric bikes changed and what they didn't in 2009, the TT organisers did something that surprised almost everyone. They introduced the TT Zero class, a race reserved exclusively for zero-emission electric motorcycles. The decision was driven partly by environmental pressure, partly by a desire to position the event as forward-looking at a time when the traditional combustion engine world was facing serious questions about its future. In those early years, the electric machines were almost comically slow by TT standards. Lap times were well over 20 minutes, against the 15 to 17-minute laps of the superbike class. The category was interesting but peripheral, a curiosity more than a competitive spectacle. What happened next surprised people. By the mid-2010s, the TT Zero lap record had fallen through 100 miles per hour, then 110, then 117. The machines were getting faster with every iteration, not at the steady, incremental pace of combustion engine development, but in the sudden, lurching jumps that characterize battery technology when it finds a breakthrough. The silence of the electric machines added a completely different quality to the spectator experience. Instead of the shattering, eardrum-assaulting shriek of a 1000cc superbike engine, the TT Zero bikes produced a high-pitched whine and an odd, almost eerie rush of air as they passed. Marshals reported that the lack of engine noise made the bikes genuinely harder to hear coming, which created its own category of safety concern. The TT Zero class was ultimately discontinued after the 2022 event, a victim of a combination of factors: the cost of developing and transporting competitive electric machines, the logistical complexity of charging infrastructure around the circuit, and the simple reality that the class had not attracted the manufacturer investment needed to make it truly competitive. But its decade-plus of existence left a clear mark. It proved that electric motorcycles could handle the mountain course at serious speeds. And it posed a question that no one in the paddock has fully answered. If battery technology continues its current trajectory, how long before an electric motorcycle is challenging the outright lap record? The physics say it's possible. The infrastructure says it's complicated. The TT's history says the machines will get there eventually, because they always do. Should the TT exist? The argument that never goes away. Every time someone dies at the Isle of Man TT, the debate resurfaces with new intensity. Should this race exist? Is it ethical to sanction an event whose death toll has now passed 260? Is there a meaningful difference between the calculated risk a professional rider accepts and a kind of institutional negligence, an event whose structure guarantees that people will continue to die, year after year, indefinitely? These questions have been asked since at least the 1970s, when the sport's governing bodies began removing the TT from their international calendar. They haven't been resolved, and they aren't going to be. The case for the TT is made, most passionately, by the riders themselves. Almost without exception, TT competitors describe the race as something they choose, not because they're reckless or because they don't understand the risk, but because the experience of riding the mountain course at full speed is, for them, categorically unlike anything else the sport offers. Former world champions who have raced at MotoGP level describe being more frightened at the TT than at any circuit race they've ever competed in, and describe that fear as part of the appeal, the clarity it brings, the way it strips everything else away. Riders speak about the course with the vocabulary of mountaineers speaking about an extreme summit. The danger is inseparable from the achievement. The case against is made most painfully by the families left behind. The TT has a long and difficult history with the deaths of its competitors. Compensation arrangements, communication with next of kin, and the provision of support to bereaved families have all been criticized over the decades, though organizers have made genuine efforts to improve in recent years. The deeper question, why are we still doing this, is one that officials tend to address not directly but obliquely, by pointing to improved medical response times, revised safety protocols, and updated scrutineering standards. These improvements are real, and they have saved lives. But they don't change the fundamental nature of the course. The walls are still there, the village streets are still there, the mountain is still there. What killed Victor Surridge in 1911 is structurally identical to what kills riders today. The speed is just higher. There is no clean resolution to this argument, and it would be dishonest to pretend there is. The TT persists because the people involved, riders, organisers, the Isle of Man government, the spectators who travel from 60 countries to watch, collectively decide, year after year, that it should. That collective decision involves accepting a death toll that no other sanctioned sporting event in the world comes close to matching. Whether that acceptance is admirable or unconscionable, or simply a reflection of something very old and very human in our relationship to extreme risk, that judgment is one that each person watching from the roadside has to make for themselves. The learning curve, what it takes to survive. A TT lap riders who compete at the TT for the first time rarely do so without years of preparation. Unlike a conventional circuit, where a newcomer can learn the layout in a day and begin competing meaningfully within a season, the mountain course demands a form of knowledge acquisition that is closer to studying for an exam than learning to race. The TT organization runs a formal newcomers orientation that covers course familiarization, safety briefings, and the specific hazards of each section. But the real learning happens on the road, lap by lap, year after year, in the amateur Manx Grand Prix that runs on the same circuit every September and serves as the unofficial qualifying school for the main event. Riders commonly spend 4, 5, 6 years competing at the Manx Grand Prix before making their TT debut. They build a mental map of every corner, every crest, every shadow on the road surface that might indicate dampness or an oil patch from an earlier session. They note where the road narrows, where the camber tilts the wrong way, where the surface breaks up on the approach to a bend. They memorize the breaking points for villages they've ridden through hundreds of times, but which, at racing speed, arrive in a fraction of the time they'd expect. Some riders write these notes down, others commit them to muscle memory through sheer repetition. All of them describe the process of learning the TT course as something you don't so much complete as simply continue indefinitely. There are always more details to absorb. There is always another subtlety you missed last year that will matter this year. Even with all that preparation, the learning curve doesn't end at the TT itself. Weather changes the course. Roadworks between race seasons alter surface conditions. A patch of tarmac that was smooth last year might have settled unevenly over winter. Riders who have competed here for a decade describe arriving each May for practice week and spending the first sessions essentially relearning a course they know intimately, checking that their mental map still matches reality. It's an ongoing process that has no equivalent in any other form of motorsport, and it explains in part why so many TT fatalities involve experienced riders. Experience on this course doesn't make you safe, it makes you fast, which is its own particular kind of danger. A race that won't stop. Even when there's no dramatic footage to show, the stories themselves carry weight. In 2024, Irish rider Lewis O'Regan, an experienced competitor who had been racing the mountain course since 2013, died following a crash at Kate's Cottage, one of the most demanding high-speed sections of the entire course, during a qualifying session for the Manx Grand Prix. He was 43 years old, and like so many others on this list, a rider with years of experience on the very road that ultimately claimed him. These are not freak occurrences confined to a handful of unlucky years. They are the recurring, structural reality of racing on public roads that pass through narrow village streets, climb open mountainside, and offer almost nowhere to recover from a mistake. Riders speak about the TT with a strange mixture of reverence and fear. Many describe it as the ultimate test of skill, precisely because the consequences of failure are so absolute. Unlike a closed circuit, where a rider can push to 10/10ths and crash into engineered safety systems, the TT punishes the smallest miscalculations severely and permanently. There's a reason riders frequently compare a single lap of the mountain course to climbing a mountain in the literal sense. something to be respected, studied for years, and never taken lightly, no matter how experienced you are. And still, every year the entry list fills up. Hundreds of riders, professional and amateur alike, choose to take their machines onto this course, fully aware of its history, fully aware of the names lost to corners like Ballagharay, Crosby, Kerromore, and Doran's Bend. For many of them, the TT isn't despite the danger, it's partly because of it. Riders frequently describe finishing a clean lap of the mountain course as one of the most profound feelings in motorsport, precisely because the cost of getting it wrong is so absolute. There's no other event where a rider can be racing past hedgerows, stone cottages, and front gardens at over 180 miles per hour one moment, and find themselves airlifted to hospital, or worse, the next. That razor-thin margin between triumph and tragedy is, for better or worse, exactly what has kept this race alive for well over a century, even as the list of names lost to it continues to grow. If this story hit you, hit subscribe, because we cover the most insane moments in motorsport history every week. Drop a comment with which story stuck with you most. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.